Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I am doing fine, and I'd like to talk a little bit today about foreign policy, believe it or not.
Sounds good.
But there's lots in the papers about foreign policy, and we've talked recently about this sort of breakthrough on negotiation between South Korea and North Korea, and the president going over there and maybe talking to Kim, and that is all good. But sometimes when there's a lot of attention given to one item in the news, it sometimes is a distraction from maybe something else going on. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe it's a coincidence that there's a distraction, because some of these things that we're talking about have been going on for a long time, but they don't get any better. But what caught our attention today was this statement that occurred as an answer to McConnell from a hearing about a resolution, a bill that's brought up for discussion, and they wanted to demolish the supporters of it because they want to try to cut down our activity in Yemen and quit the bombing and the interference. So they sent a question to the DOD, and the DOD answered, and they weren't bashful, and they were very, very adamant that the Pentagon and the DOD official said, this bill won't do any good because we don't have to obey it, and that they more or less were in charge. And unfortunately, that seems to be it. I mean, our administration is very much militarized. We have a lot of generals involved, and in some areas, everything continues. The war hasn't gone away in Afghanistan. We continue in this fight with the Saudis and Yemen. A lot of people are dying, and there's a few people up there. And Rand, I know, would like to see this thing stop. But this resolution, brought at least to the attention to people and what we should do. So I guess the real problem here is the arrogance of somebody that should be listening to the people and to the Congress, but we shouldn't even be there. There's no justification, there's no law, no declaration of war, and if any restraint, it should have come from the War Powers Resolution, and they say, no way, we're not going to pay any attention to this. Even if you pass this and say that we're not allowed to do it, we're going to ignore it. Pretty bold.
It's amazing. It's Congress has been asleep for so long. It's like a Rip Van Winkle. It finally wakes up and stretches, but it doesn't have any power because it's been asleep so long. But the letter to Mitch McConnell, what McConnell was requesting, what's the Pentagon's view of this bill that Mike Lee and a few others put in? Essentially, what it does is, aside from U.S. military actions against Al Qaeda, the U.S. is not authorized to engage in hostilities as per the War Powers Act in Yemen. And so the Pentagon just said, you can't restrict us, because these aren't hostilities. We've been, since 2015, we've been at the side of the Saudis. We've given them millions and millions and millions of gallons of gasoline. We've refueled their tankers. We've given them targeting, telling them where to bomb. Hundreds of thousands of people killed in this poor country. And the Defense Department says, we don't care, this isn't hostilities, forget you.
So we use surrogates to do it, and we use drones, and because we don't have soldiers marching up and down the streets, there's no hostility. But what if they measured hostilities by people who die at the hands of our policies and our cooperation with the Saudis? I would suggest that there would be tremendous amount of death and destruction. Yemen is a total tragic mess right now, and how can we ignore the moral responsibility for most of this? Because the Saudis probably wouldn't have done what they've done so far, if they didn't have the support of the United States. And this is really tragic. The military-industrial complex has urged it on. Israel has urged this on. So there are allies. It's not just a sleeping Congress. Maybe Congress is very much wide awake, but what they do is they keep it from the American people, so the American people are sleeping, so they don't complain much about it. As long as maybe the stock market goes up, maybe they're going to be happy and satisfied. But I'll tell you what, this kind of thing can get out of hand, which I already think it is, because right now we have this, and there's no signs that there'll be any de-escalation in Afghanistan either.
And sometimes a war can go on so long that people forget what the whole thing is about even. And that's, I think, the case with Yemen. Although it's only been a few years, people don't realize the Saudis attacked Yemen because a government that the Saudis backed was overthrown by a different group of Yemenis. Okay, we may like it, we may not like it, but Saudi Arabia is the aggressor here. They came in and said, oh, no, you don't. You can't overthrow this government that we like, so we're going to attack you. And that's what we got involved in. So there's no justification whatsoever for getting involved. But the Pentagon in the letter said, if this passes, it could undermine, this is how they try to change the subject too. It could undermine the authority for the 2001 authorization for military forces in Yemen. They're threatening it.
And also, they go back to authority. They don't ignore the principle of authority. It's just that they get it in a different way, and they ignore a moral authority and our constitutional authority and even legal authority because they said that constitutionally the president has this authority to do whatever he wants because he's the commander-in-chief, something that Bush used. And his legal officials came up and he concocted some scheme and said, you have the authority, totally ignoring and distorting the whole thing about Constitution, that you're commander-in-chief, you can do anything you want. If this is true, if this is allowed to stand, he is the dictator.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of dictatorial things done in our administrations, Republicans and Democrats, although Obama came across as being less militantly interventionist. He did his share of intervention and intervening and trying to remake the Middle East. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he just preferred drones. But the idea that you're the commander-in-chief and therefore untouchable, even in an illegal and unauthorized war, is so preposterous. There's no constitutional backing for us to prop up a government just because the Saudis like it. In Afghanistan, or in Yemen, it's completely absurd.
Now, on this resolution, which looks like it's a step in the right direction, there probably could be construed as could have been a lot better.
Yeah.
It could have. There's sort of a loophole in here, but in the meantime, I think they should pursue this and put pressure on. There should be people willing to support this, but there is a shortcoming in this resolution.
Yeah, it's not perfect, and I think you saw this many times
in
Washington.
right.
What happens? What they did in the resolution, and it is a step in the right direction, but they basically carved in a loophole. Except for U.S. operations against Al Qaeda in Yemen, the other stuff has to stop. Well, the U.S. just says, hey, everything's against Al Qaeda in Yemen, so forget you.
Right.
And I think if Senator Paul said, this is a big loophole, it's not going to really change anything if it passes because they've already redefined the terms out of any kind of substantive meaning.
Isn't that the reason they use justification for Syria and other places that we have to stay, or even in Iraq? Oh, the Al Qaeda's there, even though they weren't there until we go in. But that's the reason that we're going to have they've essentially said we have a permanent obligation to be in Syria, and we have troops there on the ground.
Except there we're supporting Al Qaeda, if you remember, because in East Ghouta, it's occupied by Al Qaeda, and the U.S. is telling the Russians and Syrians, don't bomb this, you're going to hurt Al Qaeda if you do.
But you're not supposed to tell the American people that. You're supposed to believe that we're really fighting Al Qaeda.
Exactly.
But things aren't getting much better in Afghanistan. That's been going on for so long. And there was a report out. They wanted to know how much activity. And then a false report came out, I think, in December or something. And then they decided it was in error about how many troops are there. They admit we're putting more troops in there. We're escalating there. And there's been some pretty sharp talk about what's going on. What really annoys me is when you get, one time years ago, which I still adhere to in many ways, maybe symbolically, but the CIA has committed a coup too because they run things along with the military. But they're getting very, very aggressive about fighting the war on drugs. So we have the CIA, Pompeo, escalating the war on drugs, and he's made some pretty wild statements, about what they should do over there. But just think of the war on drugs that they've renewed here in the United States, under Sessions at the Department of Justice. These are not good moves. This does not reflect a libertarian-leaning administration in any way.
Yeah, they talk about more assassinations, extrajudicial killings, I think is what Pompeo said. But, the thing is, and this kind of tipped us off, we saw something, I think, on anti-war, wasn't it, today, that was about Afghanistan, and basically how the American people are totally uninterested. Longest war in history. Not only is it the longest war in history, But President Trump keeps quietly ramping it up. In February, another 800 U.S. troops arrived in Afghanistan, brings it up to about 15,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and nobody's saying a word. And you hear what the different experts said. Last November, the U.S. commander in Afghanistan said the Afghan army with U.S. help is turning the corner against the Taliban. But last week, Dan Coats, the director of national intelligence, he told the Senate Armed Services Committee, quote, "We assess the overall security picture will deteriorate in the coming year." So you have these, glorious reports on the ground, and then they actually have to be honest and say things are not going well. The Taliban has increased since 2016, and this is the Inspector General, the DOD's Special Inspector General for Afghanistan. It said the Afghanistan government's control has decreased. The Taliban control overall has increased since 2016. So it is a war that's slowly being lost, even as we pour more resources.
Yeah, and the more we lose, the more we pump into it, just like our war here on drugs, 40 years of this, and it's a total failure. But I do want to read a paragraph here dealing with a statement made by Pompeo to sort of set the stage for what they're thinking. Here it is. It says, in October, as the new escalation was ramping up, the CIA leaked to the New York Times News of a complementary covert surge and lethal drone strikes and, quote, this is Pompeo, highly experienced agency paramilitary teams being dispatched to, quote, hunt and kill Taliban guerrillas. Oh, people love that. Both ordinary fighters and top officials. Quote from Pompeo, "This is unforgiving, relentless," and in tone, Mike Pompeo, promising a wave of extrajudicial killings reminiscent of the agency's notorious Phoenix program during the Vietnam era. I thought that was recorded as being something we shouldn't have been doing. But I don't think we're allowed to do extrajudicial killings. That's sort of like having a killer's list.
Death squads.
Yeah, I don't know.
But the State Department, they take it upon themselves to judge the human rights of every other country in the world. They do it every year. They release the human rights report. And one of the criteria for determining whether a country is really, really bad is if they engage in extrajudicial killings. So here we are admitting that, we got to ramp up the extrajudicial killings.
These are words from Pompeo. They're quite disturbing. So I don't see where we can get overly optimistic about, all of a sudden leaving Afghanistan. Obama had over 100,000 troops there, but now we're building up again, and it's a very, very strong language. So we have this in Yemen. We talk so much about Syria. I'm sure that war isn't over. I'm sure the war and the conflict in Ukraine is not over, and we're very much involved, and I guess it looks like we'll be very much involved in Iraq. So yes, it is great the president's making an overture, and it was a surprise, and it was, applauded by many, including us. I see that former President Jimmy Carter, applauded this and thought this was a step in the right direction. But at the same time, until people comprehend a foreign policy in its totality, that non-intervention is a lot different than this pragmatic intervention at bits and places and lean one direction, lean to another, and talk about how many troops are allowed to be there. Are they following the War Powers Resolution, which has not been effective at all? They just refuse to pay attention to their oath of office, that they're supposed to obey the Constitution. The Constitution is not that complex. I think most people could read that and understand that, and the only question is why do they do it? And all I can see is to build power and control in special interest group, and to work toward domination on world power and world government. And some people would just have us be the world government and run the show, and there are others who would like to morph that into a world government made up of other governments involved too. But right now, the trend is not in the direction of limited smaller government and individual sovereignty. It has unfortunately been going in the wrong direction for a long time. I happen to think that these problems that we talk about is showing that we're nearing the climactic end of this, because how many more countries can we put in our troops, and how long can we keep financing this? So it's going to be self-limiting, but the big question is how many people have to suffer before it's very clear that we have to give up the empire? You know, just think of the harm done by the Soviet system before they threw in the towel and say, you know, that's it. You know, we can't do it any longer. So I'm looking for a better time, but we still have to try to engage the American people and as many people as possible and try to bring people together, whether they're progressives or constitutionalists or libertarians, on the issue of war and peace and domination. It should be that we could have an impact, because we're going to have to replace the system we have today, because it's not going to continue the way we're doing now.
Yeah. And you know, we brought up these two issues, Afghanistan and Yemen, because it looks like Congress is waking from its slumber a little bit, and thanks to Senators Lee and the others for getting it started, and for others for maintaining a harder line. But you know, you've woken up a little bit, you're starting to wake up, you're starting to creep out of bed, but the Pentagon has thrown down the gauntlet. It doesn't matter what you do, we're going to keep doing what we keep doing. And so I think what Congress needs to do is start playing hardball. The Pentagon and the executive branch need a real smackdown. This should be a wake-up call for everyone in Congress. They're so obsessed whether Trump had an affair and this and that. If you want to take down Trump, if you want to put him back in the box he should be in constitutionally, this is a challenge to you. You should rise to the challenge.
Very, very good, Daniel. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today, because once again, we talk about an issue that we find very important, that is trying to rein in our government from overseas, pointing out the problems that exist in Yemen. Congress is ignoring and justified by unconstitutional arguments, as well as the tragedies in Afghanistan that continue, and we can't even get the real truth about what's going on. There's escalation there. They have admitted they putting more troops in, but we don't know exactly how many. So we have a long way to go to the point of having an open government and knowing what's going on, and that should be our goal. There should be more auditing of this, more coverage, and when it's said that we, by our administration, that we shouldn't let the enemy know what we're going to do, I don't think we should include the Congress and the United and the American people, that we're not allowed to know what's going on because we're responsible and we have to pay all the bills. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.